Great. Thank you so much, Basil. It is really good to be back here with you. I recognize a lot of you sitting here. There are also a lot of you I do not recognize, so it's very nice to meet you. For those of you who don't know me, I used to be part of DBC. As Basil said, we moved 3 years ago to England. But before that, I was part of DBC from the age of about 5, I think, until 25. So I've been around, I've been involved in all the different things, and I love this church. It will always be my home. So it's really, really amazing to be back here. And this morning I want to tell you about how God called us to England. So my wife and I, Emma, she's in the back at the moment with our lovely daughter Sienna, which I'm sure some of you have seen, and how we thought we knew what we were going there for, and God showed us something completely different through some difficult things, but it's just been such a joy to see how God has worked. So there's 2 parts to this. The first is Young Life, which is the charity that I work for, which I will tell you a little bit more about in a moment. And then the second part is our daughter Sienna. So 2020 started out as an incredible year. Those first 3 months were excellent. We had a new flat, we had a dog, I loved my job, things were great. And then our good friend COVID came along, everyone's lives got mixed upside down. My wife lost her job, we moved back in with my parents. We just kind of felt like we'd taken a couple of steps backwards and just trying to figure out, God, what are you doing through this? Through various conversations, my wife had always wanted to go back to England, so we said, hey, why don't we look at that as an option? And within 3 months of that conversation, we moved to England. We had both got our visas, and I had gotten a job as a teacher in England. So that process, God just opened those doors in the middle of COVID for us to move across the world. And before we left, I remember having a conversation with Keith, and we were sitting in a coffee shop, and he said to me, it really sounds like God is sending you to England, and you need to go find out why. And then at our final service, very similar to Brian this morning, Basil prayed for us and he said, I'm commissioning you as missionaries to England. And he prayed for us, and the verse he shared with us was Joshua 1 verse 9, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And I remember thinking when Basil told me this, I'm just going to teach physics. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, this missionary nonsense. That's not what I'm doing. But, you know, we'll miss you guys. It's great to be here. So we went over and had a nice white Christmas. It was all exciting. And then the 4th of January went into a lockdown, very similar to what we had here. So I started teaching in a new country, new curriculum, living 3 hours away from the school I was teaching at, because it was all online. And I had never met any students, and I had only met one teacher at the school. And for 3 months, I did remote teaching, and it was just a surreal experience. It was really difficult. I really struggled. I didn't feel like I was connecting with anyone. And luckily, schools then opened up again, and we got to go back to school, and it just got much worse. Some of you may have experience in the UK. The culture is quite different to South Africa. There is still a lot of respect in our culture here in South Africa, which they do not really have. So I just thought all of these young kids were being rude to me all the time, and I couldn't get my head around it, and there were lots of detentions and things, but I was not enjoying it. And churches were still closed because of the restrictions, so we hadn't made any friends, and we just thought, I think maybe we heard God wrong. Maybe this is not where we're supposed to be. And we almost came back to South Africa. We were very close to coming back to South Africa. When churches did open up again, there was very limited socializing, so we got to speak to people for 20 minutes after the service, and it was a struggle to make friends. But I remember about 6 months of us living there, so this was about June 2021, really feeling despondent. This is it. I don't have anything left to give. And sitting during the church service one morning and praying and saying, God, I need you to see that I can't do this anymore. I know that you want me to be here, and I'm doing my best, but surely you can see that this is not working out for us. What do you want us to do? And I just said, I'm giving it to you because I know you want us to be here. Please do something about it. So that afternoon, we bumped into one of the friends we had made and just started chatting to her. And she works for Young Life. Started telling me about Young Life. So let me tell you a little bit about Young Life. So Young Life is an international Christian charity, started in America. It's in over 100 countries. And the purpose of Young Life is to introduce adolescents to Jesus Christ. That is the purpose. That is what the whole mission is for. So she started telling me about this and how they go into schools, how they hang out with young people, how they go and look for the lost kids so that they can build friendships with them and start telling them about Jesus. And I just said, this sounds incredible. This is what my passion has always been. It's the reason I started teaching, is to build relationships with young people. And I was really excited about this, and I thought, well, this is obviously what I need to do. And I met Michael and Beth Ann, who headed up the area, and just thought to myself, I just need to be very careful that I'm not jumping off the first exit that I can find. Is this really what God wants for us here in England? So I asked God, sort of a Gideon-type prayer, to give me a very clear sign that this is what he wanted me to do. So I said, I'm not going to ask to get involved. I'm just going to step back and wait for someone to invite me in. And the next morning, I got a message from Michael, and he said, hey, would you like to help me go run a camp on the Isle of Wight, which is a small island on the south coast of England? I'd known Michael for 3 weeks at this point. I went to help him run this camp, and I did not know anyone on the camp. But he took a risk, and he said, would you like to go help me run the camp? And it was fantastic. It was amazing. Had an incredible time. And one of the things that they were doing is they had these upfront characters, very similar to what we do at HBC here, the MCs. And they were showing me this, and they're like, hey, this is pretty cool. Not many people do this. And I was like, well, actually, you know, my church back in South Africa has been doing this for 20 years. Like, this is all very familiar to me. And the way they were doing the camps, the talks, the everything, I was like, this is exactly, I can see how God has been building up through the youth ministry I did at the church, through teaching, through all of that, how God has been pointing me in this direction. So I remember there was a verse that God spoke to me very clearly through about, I was trying to decide if I should go for Young Life. It was only a 2-day week position at that point, so didn't know what that would look like. And in 1 Thessalonians it says, God will make this happen, for he who calls you is faithful. And I just remember feeling, okay, God, you want me to do this. So I went to my school to resign from my teaching job, and they said to me, well, if you're only working 2 days a week, why don't you teach 2 days a week? And I didn't even know that this was an option. So for 6 months, I got to work part-time at the school and work part-time for Young Life, which was incredible. But it did feel like I was still quite split between the two, and I really wanted to step into Young Life. But the biggest tension we had is because Young Life is a charity, it's all based on donations and on fundraising, so there were not funds for me to work 4 days a week, or to work 5 days a week. We didn't have the funds in our area. We only had the funding for 2 days a week. And I remember when I said to Michael and Beth Ann, what would it look like for me to be 5 days a week? What is the number we are looking at? And they showed me the number, and it freaked me out completely. And I said, there is no way that we can do this. I'm just going to have to keep teaching, and that's okay, because I'm enjoying this. But I kept feeling like God wanted me to move. And then someone sent me a verse about 20 minutes after I had looked at that budget and it scared me. Someone sent me a verse in 2 Chronicles. It says, listen, King Jehoshaphat, and all who live in Judah and Jerusalem, this is what the Lord says to you. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours, but God's. And I was like, okay, well, obviously, God, you're trying to tell me that I don't have to worry about the big number because you worry about the big number, and I just have to take a step. But the next morning I was driving to school, and I was very worried because I was thinking now about resigning from a very stable job as a teacher to go work for a charity that's just based off people's generosity. And I was praying that morning in the car, and I was listening to some worship music, and one of the songs was from Casting Crowns, says, Dream for You, and it said, my child, if you only knew all the plans that I have for you, just trust that I will follow through, you can follow me. And then the next morning, I just happened to be reading in the Old Testament, and I was reading about the Israelites traveling through the desert and how God was providing for them. And I just remember thinking, how can they keep missing the fact that God provides for them? How can they not believe God's going to come through for them when they've got a pillar of fire at night, when He's giving them water from the rock, but they keep doubting Him, they keep doubting Him, they keep doubting Him. And God really spoke to me in that moment. He said, aren't you just doing the same thing with me? I've been providing, I've been giving you confirmation, I've been showing you this is what I want for you, and you keep doubting me. Then I was listening to a podcast that spoke about Psalm 1 and spoke about God as our shepherd and how He leads us through the desert and how He provides for us and for our every need. That Sunday morning at church, someone was praying and they prayed through Psalm 1 and they said, I just want to speak this over you, that God is your shepherd, God will provide for you every step of the way. And then later that day, my mom sent me a message and she said, hey, I just want to encourage you. I was reading about the Israelites in the desert and how God provides for His people. And I was like, okay, God, I get it. I get it. You're starting to show me that this is what you want me to do. So I took that step of faith. I resigned and started going to 4 days a week. And we just had funding for 2 years at 4 days a week. So after that point, if we hadn't raised more money, then I was going to have to reduce my hours, which was quite intimidating. But it has just been unbelievable how God has started to come through for us. There is a church in America. I've never been to America. I've never met these people. But we got connected through some way, and they said, hey, you can apply to be one of our mission partners. So I did this application, and they approved us, and now that church supports our area $500 a month. I've never met these people, have no idea. And I was like, God's just like, don't you worry. I've got people who can provide for you. The school that I've been volunteering at, that I've been helping out with, hanging out with young people in the library, playing games, they found out I was a teacher, and they said, hey, would you like to do some tutoring for us during school hours? You don't have to do any preparation. We will bring the kids to you, and they will just do the same work they would do in the class, and we will pay you for it. And it was just incredible how God fit this very unique situation into my life. And they had been looking for someone for 6 months, but there was no one with the availability to fit into the role that they needed, and then God used that. And I got to spend more time with these young people that I was hanging out with anyway, and I got paid to do that on the side. So we just got to see God's incredible provision and blessing. And for those of you who did know me while I was serving here, you'll know that I was always passionate about youth ministry. It's always what I knew I would end up doing, didn't know what it would look like. And it has just been so incredible to walk into this and see how God prepared the road for us and how we're in this place now. And I absolutely love what I get to do. I love that I get to hang out with young people and tell them about Jesus. And what's crazy is in the UK, there are hundreds of churches, beautiful, beautiful churches. There's so much history, but there are so many empty churches. And there are so many young people who have no idea about church, about Jesus, about anything. And it's been such a joy to be able to start to share that. There's one young guy named Ben that I've been hanging out with, and he became a Christian this year. And we were having a conversation, and we were talking about God's grace. And I asked him, have you heard about God's grace? What do you think of that? He's like, isn't just grace when you say thank you for your food? And that was his only understanding of grace. He'd never heard about God's grace for him. And I got to have this incredible conversation and say to him, this is what God has done for you. Not because of what you've done, but because He loves you. So that has been an incredible joy. And we can see, as Basil commissioned us as missionaries, that's what I get to do now, is I get to tell young people about Jesus. Now, the second part of this story is things were going really well. We were feeling really excited. We had actually come back and visited here, and it was good to see everyone, but it felt like we were going back home to England, our church we got connected with, and we were feeling like we were in a really good place. We were really settled. Then we found out Emma was pregnant. It was very exciting. We'd always wanted to have children, so this was working out really well. And then at 32 weeks pregnancy, we had to go for a scan, And it was just a normal routine scan. So we went for the scan, and they checked, and she's like, oh, baby's good, there's no problems. But I'm just going to let the supervisor just look over it quickly. So we went to sit outside the consultation room. They called us back in, and there were 5 people, 5 doctors in the room. Now, you know that that's not a good sign. So we go in, and they tell us to sit down, and they say to us, we are not sure what it is, but we have found something on her brain. They just called it a white shadow. So the next day we had to go to another specialist for another scan. Then they sent us into London to a specialist hospital for another scan. The following week we had to go for an MRI. Emma went for an MRI. And eventually what came out is that Sienna had had a stroke in the womb. Now, obviously, this is a lot for us to process. This is a lot for us to go through. We were having our baby shower the Saturday following that, and we almost canceled that because we were just like, well, we don't even feel like celebrating right now. This is, it was really hard. But even in these little things, we could see God already working, because we were not supposed to go for a scan. You only go for 2 scans in the UK, 12 weeks, 20 weeks. But our midwife had said she wasn't sure about something. She just wanted us to go for a quick checkup. They had said to us, if we had come for the scan a week later or a week earlier, they probably would have missed it, because the blood on the brain drains away. And these midwives we were seeing were not specialists, so they would not have picked up the little marks that were left behind. So if we had not gone in that space of a week, we would never have picked up that anything had happened. And we would only have then noticed it when she was 5 or 6 months old, which I'll speak to in a little bit. So even in that, we could already see God was helping us. He was guiding us. He was putting us in the right place. So Emma and I spent some time processing this, trying to figure out what this means for us. And it was really challenging, because immediately after these conversations with the doctors, they would say to us, and because it's a medical reason, you are allowed to have an abortion up until full term. And we would just hear this multiple times from different doctors, and we just kept saying to them, that's not an option, we're not going to do this. But it was so difficult while we're trying to process when people say, well, here, just take the easy road out. Just get out. So we process this, we try to figure out, and some of you might know, but my older brother, when my mom was 32 weeks pregnant with him, he also had a stroke in the womb. So he had almost the same thing happen to him. So there were a lot of questions around this. Is it genetic based? Could it happen to future children? There's just a lot that we were trying to process through this. But God just started to give us an incredible, incredible peace through the situation. She was our daughter. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter what's wrong, what's right. She's our daughter. So we then, after about 2 weeks, had processed most of this. We're going for scans every single week. I think we went for 12 different scans in those last 4 weeks. And then Sienna was born, very healthy, lovely little baby, and there were absolutely no indications at that point that there were any effects from the stroke. So that was we had this tension now of, well, we don't see anything. She's wonderful. She's meeting all the milestones. She's super healthy. Everything's really great. We were going for specialist checkups, and they're like, we can't see anything happening. And then at about 4 months, we started to notice that she wouldn't really use her right-hand side. And it was just slight, but we were starting to pick up because we were looking for it. And just as the months have progressed, we've seen that she 95% of the time will use her left hand, and only if her left hand is occupied or busy will she use her right hand. And that's just because of the connections from her brain, which are weaker. So the journey we've been on of finding this news out, processing it, then Emma giving birth to a beautiful baby who we could not see that there were any effects. And most people we've spoken to who've met her have no idea that that she even has any kind of disability, because it is so slight. But we can see that if God had not given us that appointment, we would not have picked up any of this. And probably only when she was 6 or 7 months old would we have started to question. But the amazing thing is, she started going to physio when she was 5 weeks old already, to start preparing her to make sure she has the most help she can get. She started going to occupational therapy. We've been seeing specialists. And all of this has just given her an unbelievable head start in her journey of trying to deal with the effects of the stroke. So we know for certain from the care that we've been able to get in England and on the NHS, we have not had to pay for any of this at all. We know if we were living in South Africa, I don't know what we would have been able to do. I don't know what we would have been able to afford. But living in the UK, we're seeing incredible specialists. We're seeing the best doctors, and it's all covered by the NHS. We've got all these amazing programs for her. So we've seen that God needed us to be there because He wanted to look after our daughter. So, now Emma's been on maternity leave. We're trying to figure out what to do when she goes back to work, because nursery is really expensive. And we'd phoned a few nurseries, and they said to us, well, we won't take her because she has special needs. So there were 3 or 4 places we spoke to that wouldn't even have a conversation with us. So eventually we found some that were open to it, but they were incredibly expensive. And I'm working 4 days a week for a charity. Emma's, going back to her job. What are we going to do? We can't afford to do this. And Sienna has so many appointments, at least one a week that we're going to. So what are we going to do about this? So we had someone in our church, one Sunday about 3 months ago, I went forward for prayer after the service just because I was like, I just don't know how to handle what the future looks like for us. And afterwards, someone came to speak to me, a guy in our church, and he said he just has really felt that God's put on his heart that it's very important that Emma stays home with Sienna, and he wants to give us whatever we need so that Emma can stay home for another 6 months, which just unbelievable. And he said, I'm going to speak to a few more people, but all I can do at the moment is £5,000. I was like, what do you mean, all you can do at the moment? But he just said, God said, Emma needs to be with Sienna. Emma needs to care for her. So we've just seen in that God says, I've got you. I'm caring for you. Don't you worry. And even small things, we really wanted to come back to be here for my parents, Emma's parents, to meet Sienna. But flights were expensive. Emma wasn't working. We're trying to figure out how to afford this. And a couple in our church came to us and said, hey, we have some savings and we'd really like to help you get to South Africa, so we'll pay for your flights. And God is meeting those needs in the desert. And we don't have excess. We don't have a lot of money. I mean, we feel like we have a lot of money when we come back here, and that feels good. But in the UK, we're not wealthy, but we found a really nice flat, and our landlord has not put the rent up in 3 years now. God's provided every single step of the way, and it's just incredible to think the last 3 years have been some of the most difficult of my entire life, but I know for certain this is exactly where God needs us to be, and we're so grateful that we get to do this. I'm so grateful that I get to do something that I'm so passionate about, that God has called me to do. I'm so grateful that He is caring for my family, and it's just such a joy to be able to share with people what God has done in our lives, and I know what He is going to continue to do. So thank you for listening to me this morning. It's been wonderful to be here with you.